So, similarly to the Trevor Zegras and Anaheim Ducks trade price video we made a few days ago, today we are heading over to the other Montreal Canadiens trade discussion and talking about what the opposing team would apparently want from the Habs. Today we're going over to an article published by Arpon Basu on The Athletic, how the Canadiens fit in the trade market and the impact of a rising cap on negotiations, because what Basu does is he goes out there and labels out what he believes is the Carolina Hurricanes trade price for forward Martin Necas. He's of course in the picture, he's in the title, he's in the thumbnail of this video. We all recognize that he is one of the highly touted trade pieces in this year's market. And because the Montreal Canadiens have been linked to this guy for a while now, it kind of begs the question, okay, Necas on the block, Habs could go out there and get him. He fits the timeline of what the Canadiens are trying to build. He is young enough, he is not too old, and he is very, very good. We actually did see some word from, I think it was Nick Kypreos earlier this week, talking about how apparently because of the Jesperi Kotkaniemi-Sebastian Aho debacle of a few years ago, the Canadiens and Hurricanes might not actually be willing to exchange any players, and the idea of that trade going down doesn't really seem possible. Who really knows? I mean, Nick Kypreos has his own sources. I definitely don't want to invalidate his perspective as an NHL insider, but he did go out there and say that, pretty much. That because there's some bad blood from a few years ago, there may not be some sort of a trade to be had here, and the Canadiens might have to be forced to look elsewhere if they wanted to make some trades with NHL teams for a top forward. Either way, let's ignore those sentiments for a little bit and head over to this article on The Athletic. But, of course, you recognize the protocol here. The Athletic is paid for material, therefore, we are heading over to a different article, this one published on HabsFanatics.com, because Elias Edmondson went out there and pretty much transcribed the important parts of the Athletic piece. This article is not behind a paywall, so I feel comfortable going out there and using this in this video. Let's go out there and see what Arpon Basu has to say. Elliot Friedman of Sportsnet recently reported that the Hurricanes are looking for a star talent in exchange for Necas, the same thing we had heard at the Combine last week, Basu writes. So, okay, that's not surprising at all. Martin Necas is a very good player. He could be a 70, maybe 80-point guy if he's given the right minutes, and the Hurricanes want a star player for him in return. Wow, amazing, so surprising, right? Let's go out there and see what else Basu has to say. Who is considered a star player by the Hurricanes? It's subjective and unique to them, but as far as the Montreal Canadiens are concerned, it points towards a player like Mike Matheson, who would certainly help the Hurricanes a lot. They have several free agents on defense. Now, to help us out with that claim, the free agents and what exactly the Hurricanes have on their blue line, let's head over to Cap Friendly, a website that we're not going to have access to in a few weeks here because the Washington Capitals bought them out. Thanks, Washington. But the Hurricanes do have themselves only 5 guys, burgers and fries, signed on for next season and beyond on defense, and 2 of them are on their ELCs, Scott Morrow and Ronan Seeley. They don't really seem like the most guaranteed NHL players, but when it comes to guys that are sticking around that are guaranteed NHL guys, Dmitri Orlov, Jacob Slavin, Brent Burns. This is a pretty limited blue line, and it's why we had talked about the idea of the Hurricanes acquiring another defenseman on the Vancouver Canucks in Filip Hronek. Unfortunately, it doesn't really seem like those conversations are going to go anywhere, but when it comes to Mike Matheson, this is a very interesting name. Now, the same debate with Mike Matheson brings itself up in this conversation as it did with the Caden Gooley-David Reinbacher thing with the Trevor Zegras conversation we had talked about a few days ago. Because defense is technically a surplus for the Montreal Canadiens, because they do have too many defensemen on the team, too many defenseman prospects that are good enough to probably crack the team at some point this year, the question becomes, whom is it that you decide to move on from? Who do you trade? Do you decide to get rid of some of your younger prospects that aren't really going to be guaranteed to make in the team to get some extra forward depth? Do you want to trade away one of your top defensemen and utilize that roster spot on one of the younger guys? Do you want to force a David Reinbacher in there? Do you want to give Lane Hudson more minutes? Do you want to open up extra opportunity for some of your younger guys while also potentially acquiring a very solid roster forward? Mike Matheson is a very capable and strong offensive defenseman whom you could debate whether or not he was actually as good as he was, because the point number was really good. I mean, Mike Matheson this season had 62 points in 82 games played. That is awesome. But of course, the question is, if he's playing on some other team that's not Montreal, does he still get those points? Does he still get the extended minutes on the power play? Is he still that good? You could say for Carolina, aside Brent Burns, there isn't really any super highly touted number one offensive point-producing defenseman on this team, so maybe there is room for a Mike Matheson to play alongside of a Brent Burns. Maybe these guys could play in the same pairing on the power play. We saw how that didn't really work out in San Jose with Brent Burns and Erik Carlsson, but Brent Burns and Mike Matheson sounds like a pretty interesting duo. Of course, that is assuming you'd want to go with a 2 defenseman, 3 forward setup on your power play in general, which isn't really too guaranteed. Either way, though, if the Montreal Canadiens trade away a guy like Mike Matheson for Martin Necas, it does do a few things. Firstly, it gives a top power play defenseman spot to a different player like a Lane Hudson, for example. If you wanted to try to force Caden Gooley maybe to get some power play reps and get that opportunity, be my guest, maybe David Reinbacher if you really wanted to. Having Mike Matheson removed from this lineup is a big audition for a lot of the younger guys who have point-producing potential at the NHL. Even if you wanted to say, hey, what if the Montreal Canadiens decide to draft a defenseman at the 5th overall spot, trade away Matheson for Necas, get better up front, and then use their number 5 overall defenseman, who is like a Zane Parekh or something, in the NHL right away. He can be a number 1 power play quarterback right off the bat. He can be setting up Cole Caulfield, Necas, and Slafkovsky in his first NHL year. Or if you wanted to wait a little bit, say Lane Hudson takes that spot right now, and then a guy like Parekh takes that spot next year. There are a lot of options to go down if you wanted to remove Mike Matheson, because unfortunately as it is for him, Matheson is very good and a lot of Canadiens fans like him, but he's 30 years old, so he certainly isn't in that right time frame of what the Canadiens are trying to build when it comes to their prime players. Nick Suzuki is 24. Juraj Slafkovsky is 20. There are a lot of guys who are younger than Mike Matheson, almost by a decade, that it becomes a little bit difficult to project Matheson's role once Slafkovsky is a 25-year-old monster who is a first-line player and a potential franchise talent. Mike Matheson is going to be 35 at that point. Can you wait that long? That's the question. Moving him now for a guy who is more appropriate in that time frame would help out the Canadiens' long-term plans, especially if you're counting on Lane Hudson to take over that number 1 power play spot as well. But of course, this is all the Montreal Canadiens POV. I want you Carolina Hurricanes fans to let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about acquiring Mike Matheson for a guy like Martin Necas. It had seemed, based off of my comment section and different parts of social media, that the Hurricanes fan base really did not want Filip Hronek to come over. So is Mike Matheson a little bit different? I will say, when it comes to 1-to-1, Matheson did get more points, but he is left-handed and he's a lot older. So who really knows if that is a more appropriate and acceptable person to get in this trade for Carolina Hurricanes fans. You can let me know your thoughts in the comment section below if you're a Canes fanatic. What are your opinions about Mike Matheson coming over to your squad? Is Martin Necas that guy to fetch you Matheson? And is Matheson even enough? Do you want extra stuff? Do you want Matheson and a third or a second or another prospect in exchange for Martin Necas, who has been rumored to being traded for months now? Also, of course, Canadiens fans, what are your thoughts on this guy getting traded, and what are your thoughts on Necas being the guy to come back and return? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.